Pierre Trudeau, or Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau, was Canada's 15th Prime Minister for 15 years, and is regarded as one of the most influential Prime Ministers since Confederation. Pierre Trudeau was known for being determined and having a hard head, you could say. Born on October 18, 1919, Trudeau grew up in the affluent Montreal suburb of Outremont. His father was a French-Canadian lawyer and businessman, and his mother was a Scottish and French-Canadian. He had one older sister and one younger brother. So you see, growing up speaking both English and French, the Trudeau family became wealthy before Pierre was even a teenager, with his father selling his gas station business to Imperial Oil a few years prior. His father, who sadly died in 1935, left $5,000 to each of his children, which is worth around $109,000 today. This large chunk of money would benefit Trudeau since he would be financially secure. After graduating from the Elliott Collège Jean de Brébeuf and receiving his law degree from the University of Montreal in 1943, Trudeau articled for a year before beginning his master's degree in political economy at Harvard University in the fall of 1945. The teenage Trudeau had numerous beliefs. For example, he opposed conscription for overseas service and campaigned for an anti-conscription candidate in Outremont in 1942. Despite the conflict, Pierre kept busy, stated that he later regretted missing one of the major events of the century. Trudeau wrote his dissertation on communism and Christianity while studying with the brightest brains at Harvard. Trudeau, who was French Catholic and was living outside the province of Quebec for the first time, felt like an outsider at Harvard, an American and mostly Protestant university. As his sense of solitude grew, he decided to pack his belongings and finish his dissertation at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. And while still studying in his master's program in Paris, Trudeau enrolled into a PhD program at the London School of Economics to study under socialist economist Harold Laski. However, life may have caught up with Trudeau. In the summer of 1948, you see, that's the date he decided to put his life on hold and explore the world seeking a sense of purpose. He traveled to Poland at the age of 28, where he visited Auschwitz, then to Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and the Middle East. However, as Trudeau traveled the world, domestic problems began to emerge. Several incidents in Quebec occurred during Trudeau's abroad tour that were predecessors to the Quiet Revolution, which I discussed in my last video. And in response to the harsh administration of Quebec, Premier Maurice Duplessis and the decadent social establishment in Quebec, especially the Catholic Church, various anti-establishment essays and manifestos became popular. When Trudeau returned to Montreal in 1949, he rapidly became a key figure against Duplessis' administration, including engaging in a strike against Duplessis in 1949, which generated some controversy. Trudeau was then blacklisted by Premier Duplessis and was unable to teach law at the Université de Montreal as a result of his labor union activity. A determined Trudeau, on the other hand, would bounce back, becoming an economic policy advisor in the Privy Council Office, a major department of the Government of Canada that provides nonpartisan advice and support to Canadian ministries. He would subsequently write in his memoir that he found this time very valuable later on when he entered politics, which we should begin discussing. You see, Trudeau joined the Liberal Party in 1965, along with two of his friends. He ran successfully for the Liberals in the 1965 election, actually, and these three friends would be dubbed the Three Wise Men by the media. Trudeau was elected in Montreal's strong Liberal district of Mount Royal. He would then become Minister of Justice in 1967, bringing landmark changes to the criminal law acts, such as the decriminalization of homosexual acts between consenting adults, new gun ownership restrictions, and the legalization of contraception, abortion, and lotteries, as well as the authorization of breathalyzer tests on suspected drunk drivers. While he was Minister of Justice, he would justify legalizing homosexual acts by saying there is no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation. At the close of Canada's centennial year of 1967, then Prime Minister Pearson declared his decision to resign, prompting Trudeau to enter the Liberal leadership race. His vigorous campaign drew extensive media attention and mobilized numerous young people who saw Trudeau as a symbol of generational change. Many Liberals, however, were skeptical, given that he had just recently joined the party in 1965. Nonetheless, Trudeau was voted leader by 51% of the delegates. Trudeau was then sworn in as Prime Minister on April 20th, 1968, as the new leader of the governing Liberals. And despite the fact that the Liberals' mandate did not expire until November 1970, Pearson's government had almost fallen before the leadership election could even take place. because one of Pearson's bill was struck down, leading to confusion about whether this counted as a de facto motion of no confidence in the government. And just in case you don't know, a motion of no confidence is a formal representation by Parliament on whether the Prime Minister's administration is fit to continue in office. And you see, the Governor General at the time, who has the authority to call an election, eventually ruled that it did not, and the government subsequently won an actual confidence motion. But the incident demonstrated that the minority government Trudeau had inherited would not realistically last a full parliamentary term, and that he would soon need to call an election in order to win a majority in Parliament. And pretty quickly, Trudeau did just that, and declared an election for June 25th. His election campaign was aided by an unusual surge in personal popularity known as Trudeau-mania. You see, many young people in Canada at the time, particularly young women, were influenced by the 1960s counterculture and connected with Trudeau, a young, dynamic nonconformist. His charm and good looks wowed them, and he quickly gained a big fan base across the country. And despite his unparalleled popularity, Trudeau has formidable opponents, the most prominent of whom were Conservative leader Robert Stanfield and NDP leader Tommy Douglas, both popular individuals who had served as premiers of Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan respectively. On the eve of the election, rioting Quebec sovereignists hurled rocks and bottles toward Trudeau's position in the grandstand, yelling Trudeau au poteau. Instead of fleeing though, Trudeau remained in his seat facing the protesters, with no hint of fear. The populace was taken with a picture of the rebellious Prime Minister. The following day, Trudeau easily won the 1968 election with a large majority government. This was the party's first majority since 1953. Trudeau, as Prime Minister with a majority government, implemented numerous social and economic measures. Let us divide them accordingly and begin with the social program. The Official Language Act, which creates French and English co-equal official languages of the federal government, was Trudeau's first big legislative endeavor. This was not popular among Canadian Anglophones since the francophone fraction of the civil service and military doubled, prompting concerns and a sense that they were at a disadvantage. This did not deter Trudeau from announcing a multiculturalism policy later that year, though. It was the first of its sort in the world, and it would be followed by numerous provinces including Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, as well as nations such as Australia, which has a similar history and immigration pattern. This policy recognized that while Canada had 2 official languages, it would also recognize a diversity of cultures, a multicultural policy within a bilingual framework. Following a lengthy and passionate debate, Trudeau tabled Bill C-84, which abolished the death sentence entirely. And if you've seen my video, Canada's Biggest Crisis, well, you've probably heard about the October crisis, so I won't go into too much detail here, so make sure you go see the video following this one. However, as Trudeau was Prime Minister, he would be responsible for the actions taken during the crisis. So pretty much the October crisis is a series of events which culminated into the Front de Libération du Québec seizing British Trade Consul James Cross and Quebec Labour Minister Pierre Laporte, and this was Trudeau's first serious test. In response, Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act, which granted the government broad powers of arrest and detention without trial. Basically, it's martial law. During the crisis, Trudeau took a firm public stance, saying, "Just watch me," when asked how far he would go to end the violence. However, on October 17th, the Quebec Labour Minister was discovered dead in the trunk of a car. 5 FLQ members were flown to Cuba in 1970 as part of a bargain in exchange for the life of James Cross. Trudeau faced increasing challenges in Quebec, beginning with bitter relations with Quebec Premier Bourassa and his administration. The Quebec Liberals had taken a more confrontational approach with the federal government on the Constitution, French language law, and the language of air traffic control in Quebec. Trudeau became increasingly enraged at what he viewed as nationalist provocations, and as you may have seen if you watched also my earlier video on Quebec politics, the Socialist Parti Québécois and René Lévesque would win a majority government in Quebec in 1976. The Parti Québécois promised an independence referendum during their first term. Trudeau and Lévesque had been personal adversaries, with Trudeau's intellectualism standing in stark contrast to Lévesque's more working-class image. While Trudeau claimed to embrace the clarity brought by the PQ victory, he saw the unanticipated rise of the sovereignist movement as his greatest obstacle. And as Quebec began to have national dreams, Trudeau began to have personal problems, including a divorce that was chronicled in depth by the English language press on a daily basis. This, however, did help him gain popularity since some people were compassionate, while others, well, they were not, because he was kind of vulnerable to outbursts. Moving on though to his economic initiatives, Trudeau made a tremendous impression, enacting numerous procedural improvements and significantly expanding social welfare programs. Throughout Trudeau's mandate, his government ran enormous fiscal deficits. In 1971, Trudeau's government dramatically increased unemployment insurance, making it practically universal, with coverage for the Canadian labor force increasing from 75% to 96%. He also established the capital gains tax in 1972. Trudeau's administration revised the National Housing Act in 1973 to give financial help for the new home purchases, co-op housing loans, and low-interest loans for municipal and private nonprofit housing. When it comes to foreign policy, Trudeau frequently differs from his partners. Relations with the U.S. deteriorated on several fronts under the Nixon administration, including trade disputes, defense treaties, energy, fishing, the environment, cultural imperialism, and foreign policy. For example, on January 4, 1973, Trudeau voted in the House of Commons for a resolution condemning the American Christmas airstrikes on North Vietnam between December 18th and December 29th, 1972. This completely enraged Nixon, who refused to meet with the Canadian envoy in Washington for the remainder of the 1973 year. Trudeau also established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China before the United States did in 1979. He also paid an official visit to Beijing. His most well-known relationship is most likely with Cuba, as Trudeau was regarded as a friend of Fidel Castro, even once yelling "Viva Cuba, Viva Castro" in the city of Havana. While Trudeau's endorsement of Castro has received much criticism in the United States, it still did not seriously harm American-Canadian relations. Pierre Trudeau had a long political career, being re-elected until losing in 1979, but he wasn't quite done yet. You see, in 1980, Trudeau was once again re-elected with a majority government, but he faced a similar but more powerful opposition, Quebec's referendum. Trudeau quickly began federal engagement in the referendum. He nominated Jean Chrétien as the official spokesperson for the federal government. His job was to promote the no camp to the working class voters. Trudeau even pledged a new constitutional deal if Quebec voted to remain in Canada, and as history has shown, Quebec's no-voting camp would win the vote. After the results were announced, Trudeau stated that he had never been so proud to be a Quebecer and a Canadian. Following this, we have the National Energy Program, which was one of Trudeau's least popular economic proposals during his first budget. Western provinces really opposed it, seeing it as unfairly depriving them of the full economic benefits of their oil and gas resources in order to fund national social programs. Alberta, whose unemployment surged from 4 to 10% after the program was implemented, may have been the most vocal critic. Alberta's loss alone are estimated to be between $50 and $100 billion. Following this, Trudeau did not forget to respect his promise in regards to the Constitution. He agreed to meet with the premiers and even struck an agreement with 9 of the premiers at the meeting. The significant exception was Lévesque, who, according to Trudeau, would have never accepted the agreement. The Quebec's government's opposition to the new constitutional provisions became a source of ongoing squabbles between the federal and Quebec governments, and would eternally tarnish Trudeau's reputation among provincial nationalists. By 1984, Trudeau's wave had peaked. Trudeau would declare that he would not lead the Liberal Party into the next election, and on June 30th, he formally departed, bringing his 15-year term as Prime Minister to an end. He would then be done with politics and would begin a new life. You see, Trudeau would work at a law firm in Montreal, and though he rarely gave speeches or spoke to the press, when he did, his involvement in public discussions had a considerable impact. Trudeau drafted and spoke out against the Meech Lake Accord and Charlottetown Accord plans to modify the Canadian Constitution, claiming that if implemented, they would undermine federalism and the Charter of Rights. His resistance to both treaties was seen as one of the primary factors in the proposal's failure, and Trudeau stayed involved in international matters as well, visiting foreign leaders and engaging in international organizations such as Club of Rome, and also in 1985, he met with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and other authorities. In 1993, he would write his autobiography and release it, which became one of the most successful Canadian novels ever published. Sadly, he had Parkinson's disease and prostate cancer in his old age and became less active, though he continued to work at his law firm until a few months before his death at the age of 80. If you've enjoyed this video and learned a bit more about the career of Pierre Trudeau, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what else you'd like to see next in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.